Throughout our journey across Teyvat, we've traveled to multiple nations, each with their own sets of laws and regulations, and each with their own understanding of how to apply these laws to the structure of their societies. Our most recent adventure has brought us to none other than the nation of justice itself. But what does justice really mean in Fontaine, and how is it applied? The answer to this question is not simple, and we have to first establish some background for justice as a concept in the world of Teyvat as a whole. Warning, this video contains spoilers for the 4.0 Archon quests as well as other major Archon quests in Genshin Impact. Each nation in Teyvat has a specific ideal or focal value which defines the most important and central aspect of that nation. For the nations that we have set foot in so far before Fontaine, those would be Freedom in Mondstadt, Contract in Liyue, Eternity in Inazuma, and Wisdom in Sumeru. These nations each have their own laws as well as specific institutions which are responsible for monitoring that these laws are upheld in their respective societies. For this reason, while these nations share certain fundamental laws in terms of how to deal with the most common crimes, justice is not a unicentral concept in Teyvat and is understood and applied differently in accordance with the regulations of each nation. In addition to this, the perception as well as application of justice in each nation are directly influenced by the focal value of that nation. For example, in Mondstadt, the Knights of Favonius are the institution responsible for applying laws and upholding the justice. The very genesis of the Knights of Favonius by Vanessa, 1,000 years prior to the current events of the game, was to ensure that the aristocracy would never rule in Mondstadt again, and to protect its society's freedom. In other words, the creation and applications of laws and justice in Mondstadt are tied strongly with the notion of protecting the nation's freedom. Similarly, in Liyue, the ideal of contracts has a direct and determining influence on how laws and justice are applied. The Liyue Qixing is the organization that governs over Liyue and implements laws and regulations which are by and large related to trade and commerce. Much of the legal structure of Liyue ensures that the flow of business and trade occurs smoothly while protecting the integrity of contracts in the society. Inazuma's Tri-Commission plays a role of governance similar to the factions mentioned for the previous nations, with the key difference of the focal value of the nation, eternity. In Inazuma, the Archon has a more direct influence on how laws are applied in the nation, and the Tri-Commission inevitably practices absolute obedience to the principles of eternity mediated through the Raiden Shogun. It is interesting to note that a phenomenon such as the Vision Hunt Decree, which would otherwise seem unjust and contradictory to the laws and values of other nations, Mondstadt in particular, was still systematically applied in Inazuma due to its perceived necessity as being a key for upholding the focal value of eternity in accordance with the Archon's wish. In Sumeru, wisdom is the ideal and the focal value of the society, and the Sumeru Academia is not only the center of education and pursuing wisdom, but also the main governing body of the nation. From this alone, it can be seen that the implementation of laws and justice in this nation is closely tied with the ideal of wisdom itself. It is important to note that in some nations, the warped application of the ideal to the governing process of the nation leads to corruption and inhumane applications of laws, such as the Vision Hunt Decree in Inazuma and the use of the Akasha terminals in Sumeru to manipulate and experiment on the people of the nation. However, in each of these nations, thanks to the heroic deeds of the people of that nation and help from the traveler, the dogmatic mingling of the ideal and justice is resolved, and thus changes occur in how nations apply their laws, such as the abolition of the Vision Hunt Decree in Inazuma and the shutdown of the Akasha terminals in Sumeru. The relationship between the ideal of a nation and the application of justice gives an important perspective on how the concept of justice is perceived across Teyvat. So far, we have discussed several nations in Teyvat with different ideals and how the perception and implementation of justice in them are influenced by their respective focal values. But what about the nation of, well, justice? In Fontaine, Maison Gardiennage is the organization responsible for enforcing the laws of the nation. A branch of this organization known as Maréchaussée Fantôme is responsible for the investigations and detective work, led by Chief Justice Neuvillette, who is also the primary judge of court trials, with his judgment second only to the Oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinale, which delivers the absolute and ultimate verdict. We will talk about all of these parties later in this video. Trials are held in Opera Epiclese, which is an edifice in Fontaine that houses not only trials but also performances and plays. There's an additional component to the justice system in Fontaine, and that is trial by duel. Those who believe they have suffered injustice or those who do not hope to achieve success in court can alternatively have a duel with a champion duelist specifically designated for this purpose. These champion duelists are highly skilled individuals, but the outcome of this duel can be decisive, and it is simple. If the accused wins the duel, they're acquitted. If they wish to stop the duel, they will go to trial as usual, and finally, they may choose to fight until death. The purpose of this alternative system is to give the people of Fontaine a chance to defend their honor. But what about the very concept of justice itself? Since justice is the ideal and focal value of Fontaine, surely this nation must have the most uncontaminated and pure notion and perception of justice without any external influence, right? Well, not exactly. In order to get a better grasp of this nation's perception of justice, we need to look at the different societal components of this nation and how they understand the ideal of their own nation. Let's analyze the general population of Fontaine society first. In the beginning of the Archon quest, we speak with two NPCs in Le Maritime Harbor who give us a basic idea of how the people of Fontaine view court trials as something akin to a theatrical drama performance. Shortly afterwards, when Farina, the Archon of Fontaine, makes her first appearance, the reaction of the populace to her speech and the implication of a trial also invoke the idea of some kind of dramatic performance to the audience present. There almost seems to be some kind of bi-directional influence and positive feedback loop between the Archon and the people, where melodramatic and flamboyant behavior of one amplifies the similar demeanor of the other. Lenny mentions that the line between a trial and a performance can be blurred for the people of Fontaine, further supporting the idea that the execution of justice in Fontaine seems to be strongly tied with drama to the general populace. Conversing with NPCs all throughout Fontaine, especially ones near the Opera Epiclese and the Fountain of Lucine, gives us further information about how the people of Fontaine can apply the principles of drama performances to trials, such as happy and sad endings, despite these endings in question being in reality the final verdict given by the court to close the case. Another interesting component of this phenomenon is the active engagement of the people in the court trials of Opera Epiclese. During the two trials that take place in the Acts 1 and 2 of the Fontaine Archon quest, there are a variety of different reactions from the audience and the court, with some being histrionic while others being more rational. Nevertheless, such active participation of the audience and the court shows an interesting and perhaps unexpected aspect of how trials and justice are viewed in this nation. Despite being the ideal and focal value itself, the notion of justice is intermingled with drama, which would otherwise seem like an alien concept to outsiders. Even in Fontaine, there are those who do not share this melodramatic outlook on trials. A notable example of this would be Navia, who voices her disagreement with the idea of treating trials as some kind of opera or performance. Evidently, the very reason she chose the Traveler to work with from the beginning of the Archon quest was precisely because, as an outsider, the Traveler did not have a perspective on trials that was intertwined with drama. Navia's own experience with Fontaine's judicial system and how her father's case was not solved in the past may have had an impact of her view, as well as how she perceives trials to be strictly based on factual information and not theatrics. Despite such exceptions, most of the general populace do have the notions of drama and performances mixed with trials, which raises the question: why do the people of Fontaine have such a view of justice and trials? The visual landscape of Fontaine, the abundance of artists in the nation, the fashion of the people, and the architecture show a clear presence of elegance and dramatic beauty to the different aspects of this nation, so perhaps it is only natural that the ideal of this nation is mixed with a sense of artistic drama. But there is another component of this nation that has a direct relationship with the perception of its people: the Archon. Our first encounter with Fontaine's Archon was dramatic, to say the least, but it also gave us quite an unexpected perspective of how the Archon of Justice understands and applies, well, justice. With a sensational and self-centered appearance, she confidently asserts and introduces herself as the Archon of the nation and proceeds to taunt the traveler from a place of self-established authority. Although perhaps she isn't as confident as she presents herself to be.
Are you not afraid? Might I remind you that this is a duel against the divine?
This is perhaps a strong and imposing introduction of how justice is treated in Fontaine, considering the Archon casually challenges the traveler to a duel, then proceeds to charge them for trial over a very odd law in Fontaine, which is ironically debunked in a similarly performative and theatrical manner by none other than the talented magician Linny. But our observations about the Archon's approach towards justice do not merely stop here. Later in the Archon quest, when the unexpected disaster occurs during Linny's performance, Farina takes a very strong stance in accusing Linny for Cowell's death. Although considering the evidence available at the time, Linny would indeed be the most suspicious person, the tone and level of confidence of the Archon about her own judgment and constructing a detailed account of every step of how she believed the entire incident was set up by Linny and his possible accomplices was too presumptuous even for the reasonable suspicion on Linny at the time. In addition, when counter-evidence is provided by the traveler, instead of rationally dealing with the situation, she acts as though she is dealing with some kind of personal defeat, although the defeat in question is really about accusing a possibly innocent person with a charge as heavy as murder. Although it is important to note that later she does also worry about the fact that she has been possibly accusing an innocent person, but she does not hesitate to come up with another ad hoc account of accusation after Juan provides false evidence against Linny. Later, when the truth of this case is unraveled and Halsey comes forward, she tries to leave the scene out of embarrassment instead of taking responsibility over persistently accusing an innocent person with an unnecessary amount of confidence. With all of these observations, one cannot help but find this behavior rather unbefitting of the Archon of Justice. After all, if the Archon of Justice can take a one-sided argumentative approach in accusing a possible suspect, under circumstances that are not quite certain, what does this tell us about the application of justice in Fontaine as a whole? Does this mean the trials merely go based on what kind of melodramatic accusation is more convincing in the court? Well, not quite. Despite being the Archon of Justice and presumably its embodiment, Farina does not actually make the ultimate decision in the court trials, nor does she inflict justice directly. Ironically, she is more of an active observer, much like the general populace that we discussed previously, and perhaps the very reason for people's perception of justice as some kind of drama performance is due to the behavior and approach of the Archon of the nation. Or maybe it's entirely the other way around. Or perhaps there's a two-sided relationship. Regardless, there are similarities in how the Archon and the people of the nation view trials and the application of justice, and they both take a melodramatically active approach in court trials. But how is justice actually applied in the court then? How is the ultimate decision made for cases if not by the Archon of Justice? To answer this question, we need to look at two important factors: the Chief Justice Neuvillette and Oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinale. Unlike the sensationalistic nature of the people and the Archon, the Chief Justice of Fontaine, Monsieur Neuvillette, takes a much more rational and evidence-based approach to deal with court cases and maintains a calm and reserved demeanor. Chief Justice Neuvillette is the leader of the Marechaussee Fontaine, which is the organization responsible for conducting investigations and detective work regarding legal cases. The organization keeps an extensive and detailed archive of all past records regarding trials that take place in Opera Epiclese, as well as the evidence that is compiled during the investigation processes, and Neuvillette's own office contains much of these records. Neuvillette's focus on a systematic method primarily based on logic to compile and deduct information based on available evidence ensures that the trials do not suffer from over-dramatization, and he does not hesitate to debunk even the Archon herself when she showcases unreasonable behavior or judgment. During the trial of Lenny, although he acknowledges that Lenny is indeed the most suspicious party based on the available evidence at the time, he does not take a personal and confident stance against the suspect and stays neutral to compile all evidence possible before giving a verdict. The same holds true for the charges that Navia puts forth against Marcel in the second act of the Fontaine Archon quest. Although Neuvillette is extremely capable in managing courts and delivering a reasonable initial verdict, it seems that he is not without his own internal conflict in terms of his definition of justice as well as his emotional stance in regards to court cases. To provide some context for this, we have to go back to some time in the past prior to the current events of the game and the case of Callus, Navia's father. The enigmatic nature of the water from the primordial sea as well as the safety of his own daughter led Callus to stay silent about the truth of this case. Instead of going to trial in court and proving his own innocence, he chose trial by duel with the intention to die, which led to great confusion from the Chief Justice. He showcases remorse that he could not help with the case in any meaningful manner early in the Archon quest during the initial investigation of the case by Navia and the Traveler. At the end of the Act 2, and after solving the case of the serial disappearances and uncovering the truth behind Callus's actions, Neuvillette opens up more about his own feelings regarding the case. Here, he specifically questions the very concept of justice itself and explains how he was under the impression that people prioritize justice as one that served their survivability and their base instincts, and for that reason he believed that Callus could have not gone to duel with the intent to die while being innocent. Callus's sacrifice to protect his own daughter while simultaneously helping the future solving of the case has changed Neuvillette's viewpoint of how justice is perceived by others, and that the justice serving a greater purpose than one's own life might just be the ultimate justice. It also seems that court trials actually take quite a toll on Chief Justice's emotional state. The story has given strong implication that Neuvillette is likely the Hydro Dragon mentioned in the Legends of Fontaine, and we can directly see the emotional impact of court cases through the fact that it rains on days when there are court trials, and it rains multiple times during the Archon quest. Evidently, even the Chief Justice does not have a uniform understanding of justice, and his sentiments can influence or even go in conflict with the practical application of justice in Fontaine. It is important to note that although Neuvillette is the Chief Justice of Fontaine and is responsible for giving the initial court verdict, he does not give the absolute and ultimate verdict, for that is the role of Oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinale. It is mentioned that the verdict given by the Oratrice always is the same as Neuvillette. However, there is one exception which we do encounter in the second act of Fontaine's Archon quest regarding Child's Trial. But what exactly is the Oratrice, and how does it understand and apply justice? We will now move on to this discussion. Perhaps the most enigmatic and obscure component of Fontaine's judicial system, while being the ultimate deliverer of justice, is the Oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinale. For the sake of time, I will refer to it as l'Oratrice for the rest of this video. L'Oratrice is a mechanical device developed by the Hydro Archon Farina and operates to provide energy for the nation of Fontaine by converting the belief of the people of Fontaine in justice to an energy medium known as the indemnitium. Additionally, this device is active during all court trials and responds accordingly to evidence put forth in trials by changing its scales. After all evidence is compiled and the Chief Justice gives the initial verdict, l'Oratrice makes one final verdict, which is the absolute word of justice. Currently, we have very limited information regarding l'Oratrice, and the principles through which it operates are quite unknown. Neuvillette mentions that the device seems to have a consciousness of its own, and perhaps even self-awareness, considering that it can generate sentences. Additionally, Linny mentions that as he was investigating the core of l'Oratrice, he heard a voice coming from within, which means that its consciousness might actually be tangible. In some way, the device can be compared to the Akasha system that was previously used in Sumeru, especially in a sense that the previous Dendro Archon Greater Lord Rukkhadevata transferred her own consciousness to the system. In this line of comparison, one point that can be noted is the idea of over-reliance on a mechanical device for the sake of achieving the ideal of a nation, wisdom in the case of Sumeru, and justice in the case of Fontaine. But is this truly the best means of defining the ideal of a nation? In the case of Sumeru, the Akasha system was manipulated by the academia to run unethical experiments on the people and was ultimately shut down. Could l'Oratrice go through a similar fate in Fontaine? That we do not know yet, since we have not progressed sufficiently through the story, but the key might lie in the nature of l'Oratrice's consciousness. By the end of the Fontaine Archon Quest Act 2, we realize that l'Oratrice does not rely solely on the evidence given during the court proceeding, nor does it merely replicate the verdict given by the Chief Justice, considering that it charges Child as guilty despite no evidence being put forth against him, indicating that the device might actually see beyond what is presented in the court and can perhaps understand an element regarding Child's past or present that would render him guilty. Of course, all of this is mere speculation, and it's possible that the device is being manipulated by a third party or some other factor currently unknown to us. But it is interesting to note that even the Hydro Archon herself does not truly grasp how l'Oratrice operates or reaches a verdict, as she is baffled by the surprising judgments during Child's trial, similar to everyone else. Even though she pretends to totally understand just to save face in front of her people,
All shall be revealed in time. You will come to understand my noble intentions, as well as the absolute correctness of the Oratrice's verdict.
clearly seen through by the Chief Justice.
Based on Farina's reaction, I doubt even she had any idea what was going on. She managed to bluff her way through it, though, with her time-tested twin tricks of bravado and drama.
So at the end of this discussion, let's return to this key question. What does justice mean in Fontaine? There's no single answer to this question, and various social constituents of this nation perceive this ideal differently. Even among the general populace, although we did mention how commonly drama and theatrical performances are intermingled with the concept of delivering justice, and the final verdict can often be perceived as happy or sad endings, ultimately people have their own individual understandings of justice, as we can see through the reactions of the audiences in court trials or our conversations with the people of Fontaine. One thing, however, that can be understood as a shared fundamental sentiment is that the people of Fontaine, regardless of their definition of justice, feel very strongly about this ideal, and that is also why L'Oratrice is capable of converting their belief in justice into an energy medium usable in the nation. In a similar sense, in Sumeru, people also have different perceptions of what wisdom is and take different approaches in pursuing that ideal, and the same can be said about all other nations and their respective ideals as well. However, there are several obscure points about Fontaine at this stage of the story which we are not aware of. For example, the foretold prophecy and how all people in Fontaine are born with sin. Can this prophecy have a potential influence on the perception of justice in this nation if it begins to become reality? Can the Archon's behavior and perception be related to the nature of this prophecy? What about L'Oratrice? What is the true nature of L'Oratrice, and why did it give a verdict different than that of what available evidence suggested in Child's trial? We do not know the answer to these questions yet, but they will likely shed more light to the position of justice in this nation and the actual weight it carries. For now, we will have to wait for more information in future Archon quests. With that, we come to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it since it is my first lore video on YouTube. See you guys next time.